Welcome back to Stories of Rebellion. This week we're exploring farming rebellions and the question, are farmers rebels? My name's Katie.
I'm Emily.
And my name's Sitza.
I'm going to begin with my research as I researched up to the 1700s, and I focused mainly on three rebellions during this time period, the first being Jack Cade's Rebellion in 1450. This took place in England under Henry VI, and it was local small property owners that were upset by unfair taxation and inflation. The rebellion ended with the rebels being crushed by the crown. However, this battle is said to have contributed to the eventual fall of the crown. The Dak War, which took place in 1542, took place in Sweden during the Reformation, which was a period of significant religious and political changes. Again, the farmers were fighting against unfair taxation, conscription, and the suppression of religious freedom. When the government tried to suppress the rebellion, it exploded into a full-scale war, and even though the rebels had many successes, they were eventually defeated. In the Cudgel War, which also happened in Sweden during a time of socioeconomic turmoil, the peasantry were unfairly taxed once again, and when they could not pay the taxes, their food was plundered by soldiers, and they were forced to house the soldiers. This war had many casualties, and the rebels ended up losing once again. As we can see through these examples, there's kind of a common theme that the rebels are being suppressed by the government, and they're not able to change how they're being treated, and they resort to violent actions.
All right, my research focused on the years 1700 to 2000. I also looked at three different rebellions, the first one being Shays Rebellion from 1786 to 1787. It was at the end of the Revolutionary War, and farmers who fought in the war received little compensation and were struggling to make ends meet. And Massachusetts residents had to pay higher taxes than they did to the British. Because farmers couldn't make money off of their crops, the Boston authorities started arresting the farmers and foreclosing on their farms. They tried to be peaceful at first, but other actions began. Daniel Shays became the leader in this rebellion, and it all started to escalate with violence coming from both the farmers and the government against them. Eventually, the government was able to get Shays and his men to flee and scatter, effectively ending the rebellion. This rebellion in all demonstrated the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation, causing the framing of a new constitution. The second rebellion that I focused on was the Anti-Rent War from 1839 to 1846. In addition to rent, a farmer had to provide certain services to the landowner. On the sale of the lease, a New York farmer had to pay the proprietor an alienation fine of from 1/10 to 1/3 of the sale price. The farmers rose in opposition and refused to pay rent. Eventually, violence broke out and the militia was called in, and martial law was declared in 1845 after resistance spread. Because of this, the disturbances lessened. The aftermath was that it ceased when a new state constitution was established in 1846, which abolished the leasehold system of land tenure and instituted free, simple ownership. The third rebellion I focused on was the rebellion during the Great Depression. This is where prices dropped so low that many farmers went bankrupt and lost their farms. Some farmers became angry and wanted the government to step in to keep farm families in their home. They never really became violent, but some groups threatened members of the government, and some farmers set up blockades on country roads and made trucks carrying farm products turn around and go back home. They called it the farm strike. The effort did not have any effect on prices, however. The result was that the federal government passed the Agricultural Adjustment Act, which set limits on the size of the crops and herds farmers could produce. All in all three of these rebellions showed the theme of the fact that the rebellions were condemned at the time, but they're looked back upon as providing necessary demonstrations to the government and country for important actions to take place, such as the implementation of new policy.
So I looked into farmers' rebellions in Argentina, India, and France in the 21st century. In Argentina and in India, farmers rebelled against new laws that were being implemented to basically increase their taxes or decrease their provisions. 3 bills were passed in India that made it difficult for farmers to make a living, and the farmers came out to protest, and this protest lasted for about a year. A year later, the government repealed these laws, and the rebellions were successful. In Argentina, farmers blocked roads and withheld products from market, and staged demonstrations after the government increased taxes on their grain exports. Whereas in France, farmers In France, farmers began to protest against climate-friendly laws that would hurt their margins and make it difficult for them to make a living. The farmers, on the other hand, take it to the extreme and staged protests that ended up having significant toll on the European economy.
Okay. So I think that the first question that we should talk about is, of course, are farmers rebels? So I personally obviously think that they are, because I feel like in all of my different rebellions that I've studied, you see that the farmers are really able to take arms and fight against the government for the unfair treatment that they are receiving. I also do think, though, that since they're often underfunded and outnumbered, they kind of get pushed aside and not thought of as a real threat sometimes. But when we see the long-term changes that they've had in some governments and the subtle changes in the ideology of the public and certain public figures after these rebellions happen, you see that they can have a really big impact, and they definitely are rebels, in my opinion.
I feel like, though, you have to specify the question, because I don't know if you can logically generalize all farmers as rebels. Like, my grandpa's a farmer. Does that automatically make him a rebel?
I mean, right now farmers in places like Arizona and California get water rights that their water rights basically supersede the water rights of the general public. And so in a drought, water is prioritized to go to the farmers. If the United States government today was to wake up and say, we're taking away this because, people need water, do you think your grandparents would just let it slide, or basically not do anything about it? Or do you think, the Capitol will be storming and tractors will be parked all around the White House and things like that?
Well, I feel like that being hypothetical, you can't necessarily say that right now all the farmers in the country are rebels when they haven't done anything.
Okay, but I think that this is a fair thing to bring up, because if you think about it, if you put our current day farmers in the position that these farmers and peasants are in these rebellions, where they have no way to change the way that they're being treated by their government in a way like representation in their government, they are resorting to these violent tactics because they think that good old rebellion, if you can't change it in the way that the government has allocated, then you have to change it in the only way that you can. And I think that today, if something really happened and it came down to it, I think that we could have a farmers' rebellion. And we do. We have them all over the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, I feel like in the United States specifically, in this day and age with the social media, the technology that we have, I feel like it would be harder to be considered what is traditionally known as a rebel, because I feel like the first act that someone would be doing if, for example, the government just woke up and decided to take all their resources away would be, putting something on social media or contacting their representative, trying to use technology to get a place in the government rather than actually resorting to violence.
Okay, so we could agree that not all the farmers at this moment are rebels, but for the ones that we could maybe consider as rebels or rebelling, why do they rebel? What makes these farmers rebels? And why do they rebel? And when you look into the French right now and Europe as a whole, we could agree that these guys are rebelling against the government because the government is trying to enact in laws that generally help the world or the general public as a whole. These are laws that are going to tighten restrictions that affect climate change, and the farmers are against it because it hurts their bottom line, and they are really against it. They're doing everything they can to stop these laws from passing.
Mm-hmm.
And in this case, we could generally see that they are rebels. What they're doing is textbook rebelling against the government.
Yeah, and this is modern day.
Yeah. So I guess we could say that, some of them are, and it's because maybe the government is trying to do this to them. All rebellions happen for different reasons. And like, from your research, you probably could elucidate more on that.
Yeah, I really think that this kind of ties back to a different project that I've done about like women's suffrage, and basically the whole idea was that they had resorted to violent means and like classical rebellion, like the American Revolution, how that happened. They had to fight against, and pretty much every revolution that you look at in history, when the government is not giving a group of people the chance to make changes in the government for themselves and have any kind of representation, I think that sometimes humans feel they have to resort back to the only way they really see themselves being able to make a change in their life and change the situation that's really detrimental to them.
Mm-hmm. And it's almost like, in the end, like, who do you blame? The rebels or the government?
Yeah, because also I think that I actually talked about this in my research, that these situations are usually a small rebellion or a local issue that turns into a full-scale battle or war after the government makes no changes and doesn't try to amend any of the issues being brought up by this group of citizens here. And I think that if the government maybe had more foresight and thought more, like this could be a very big issue for us, then maybe they would kind of have more of a kickstart to like face these issues head on.
Mm-hmm.
But what do we think is a general theme overall in these farming rebellions?
I noticed that when we talked about it, we kind of had like opposite themes on almost. Yours was more like about how the peasantry was suppressed and abused by the government, and it's led to violent revolts. Whereas mine was more like, these revolts were necessary to create this policy change, for example, in the United States specifically. But, yeah, so I mean, like the Shays Rebellion, like, that's the reason we have the Constitution rather than the Articles of Confederation. The Anti-Rent War, it created a new state constitution. During the Great Depression, it resulted in passing the Agricultural Adjustment Act. Like, all these resulted in these necessary policy changes. And would we have even the Constitution today if it weren't for Shays Rebellion, for example?
I actually really agree with you, and I kind of think that I was looking at it from a different perspective. I think I was looking more at it in like a reoccurring theme in the way that it's like the root cause and like why these rebellions really start to happen. But I completely agree with you, and I really think that even in these rebellions, though, I think my losses were more violent, and like I think that your rebellions were more successful than mine, the ones that I studied were. But I do think that I saw the theme throughout them, that they made lasting changes in the way that it changed the public's perception of the issue, or it put like seeds of idea into some of the political, some of the people that were in the political scene in these countries.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. And I guess there's a portion of it that is just mainly like like peasantry. Even today, like farmers are still kind of considered peasants, especially in places like Europe, where, and like some of the articles I was reading were coming from things like the Journal of Peasant Studies, where like at least they're upfront in acknowledging that the society still considers them as peasants. So maybe that could probably be the reason for it. Like we're still treating people like human beings as being lesser than in today's society.
Yeah, I completely understand that. Like when they're being treated as if they're less than a human, obviously it's going to make them upset, and it's also going to want to make them act out, because if they're being treated less than, why are they going to continue trying to prove that they're more than? Sometimes at some point I feel like it's like almost, what do I have to do to make you see me for who I actually am and the benefit that they give to the countries that they're in?
Mm-hmm.
How do you guys think would be the best way to work to prevent these rebellions from happening?
I don't know if you can. I think if a rebellion... I mean, this whole time I've been thinking about this, like, through a Hunger Games perspective, almost. And so, like, if you're watching the Hunger Games, like, you're watching it not with the intention of, oh, how can we stop, like, all the districts from going against the Capitol? And you're watching it from the perspective of this rebellion against the Capitol is needed so we can stop, killing all these children. And so, like, you kind of look at it and you're like, yeah, these rebellions are not great, but could it be necessary so that the government can treat them better? Like, and that's a big question, I think.
Yeah, but I think in, like, the 21st century is a bit more, like, complicated. We've got global markets. We've got so many different things that affect, like, farmers and whether they rebel or not. And so, like, stopping them in the 21st century isn't just, like, are we then going to keep giving farmers exactly what they want all the time? Is that what a rebellion-free world from farmers is like, where farmers get everything they want and, like, the rest of us kind of just have to put up with it, expensive food prices and things like that? Or do we find a sort of balance to it where we treat them fairly and they treat us fairly, we negotiate in good faith and things like that?
That's very interesting, and I honestly see both sides of this. I do think, though, that these rebellions in the 21st century, as you were saying, I do think it's a little bit different because we don't want there to be fighting. We see wars that are just absolutely terrible, and I feel like especially today, they can escalate so quickly in such little time that I feel like kind of trying to face the problem before it becomes a violent issue is important. And I really think that it's about representation in government and having the opportunity that if there's an issue or a law gets passed that, say, the farming group of citizens really does not like, they should be able to work and rally if they rally enough people to make this change in the government.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's really just about that. I don't think it's about farmers getting everything they want because I think it takes a very, very dire situation to get them to revolt in these ways. But I do think they need to be able to work democratically to be able to make changes in their government to prevent these revolts.
Yeah.
Okay.
I agree.
Wrap?
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, wait, should we say thank you for...
Yeah, we can. Thanks for listening.
Come back to the Stories of Rebellions podcast. We had a great time sharing with you today. Goodbye.